Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Places We'll Go show. This week, we are really excited to announce that we've got Charlie Dawson, who's the founder of the foundation, joining us to talk about his journey and what leads to true customer success. To give you a little bit of background, the foundation is a leading customer success consultancy that has been going on 21 years, that actually spans 2 millennia. Pretty cool. The foundation actually has an amazing reputation for putting customers first and at the heart of everything that they do. And as I mentioned, leads and literally works with some of the best companies of the world, helping them become more customer-centric. Now, beyond this, Charlie is actually a soon-to-be published author as well. He's a co-author of a book, which by his own admission took up to 7 years to write. So that's quite an ordeal. And perhaps what really sums Charlie up is his persistency and his grit to keep on going, whether it be the building up the foundation brick by brick, or of course, writing his own book. Charlie is here today to share some of his insights on what it takes to really develop true customer success. And I'm sure he's going to share a range of examples along the way, both some of perhaps the successes and the failures of doing so. He's also going to talk of his journey and how he was able to create a powerhouse that is the foundation, but more as importantly, how he was able to sustain it over this long period of time. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Charlie Dawson onto the show this morning. Charlie, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Well, Mark, let me pass over to you to kick us off for the first question.
Thanks, Ritchie, and hi, everybody. And great to have you on, Charlie. We've known each other for a while, and you're a man after my own heart. But customer to the fore, customer focus wins the day, and you're a good guy. So I know everyone's going to enjoy hearing from you. Hey, let's get started. We're still living in curious times. Different parts of the world opening up at different times. UK starting to feel a little bit more normal, but these are weird times. So where are you, and how are you doing in 2021?
Well, we say doing okay. It's been an interesting 12 months. I think the most difficult bit was probably about June last year. So that people didn't have much bandwidth to do thoughtful work when they were trying to keep the wheels on their businesses in different ways. Either they didn't have a business, or they couldn't operate their business, or they were so busy they didn't have any spare time. But I think from there it's got a little bit better gradually, and it's been interesting actually that the people's organizations' understanding of sort of why they're here and sort of their values and so on have it feels like that's become much more front of mind and much more down to earth and straightforward in people's understanding. So that's quite a useful change that I think we've seen in the last year. But yeah, doing okay, thankfully.
You know, Charlie, it's funny. I think that this last year has pretty much been the year when the customer has come to the forefront in many ways. We're all in this together. We're all sitting in these precarious times, and where the customer, where the company, all that kind of stuff. So do you feel the same? Do you feel that companies have sort of evolved their thinking more and more? And we've seen loads of examples of companies pivoting what they do in order to cater to the customer need at this point in time. So what's your point of view on that front?
I think the last year has helped a bit. I think the whole digital revolution has made a very big difference, because I suppose going back a very long time, when sort of products and things like packaged goods dominated the landscape, the bits of an organization that customers saw was a very small part of the organization, and the rest was hidden. And then sort of service businesses and service brands sort of grew in prominence. And that was a new kind of challenge, because a lot more of the business was kind of visible, a lot more of the business affected what customers thought of them. But then I think digital has been another whole step where it's become much more obvious that customers receive the product of what the whole organization does, and the organization's got to join itself up much more effectively to try and orchestrate that kind of outcome. And I guess obviously one of the things that happened in the last year is the whole digital the reliance on digital channels has rocketed. So in a lot of industries, traditional retailers, automotive, people like that, they've simply had to learn to do things digitally in ways they haven't done before. And that's caused them to wonder things about customers and learn things about customers. And so, yeah, I think it's been another helpful step.
Yeah, I think these things come in layers, don't they? But I would choose to believe that in uncertain times, being more customer oriented is going to help companies to win. We'll talk about how you built the foundation, but I'm interested to know if there was a stimulus for why you started to care about customer orientation and customers. What did you have an epiphany or a bad experience? Where did it start for you in terms of customer orientation?
So I guess going a terrifyingly long way back. So I originally did an engineering degree, but I didn't like engineering companies, and I went and joined the advertising industry. I worked for Saatchi's for a bit, and then I worked for a smaller agency called Duckworth Finger Waters for a bit. And while I was there, I guess serendipity always plays a part. I was lucky enough to be the account director on the launch of Daewoo cars into the UK in 1995, and it turned out to be a very innovative launch, and it was driven by the Koreans setting ridiculous targets. They wanted to get 1% of the market in the UK in 1 year, which doesn't sound very much, but it's taken Mazda 24 years to get that far. And they didn't just ask the question, they also said, don't tell us why we can't do it, tell us how we could do it. So they set the conditions up so that we could only be thinking about very bold things, because doing all the conventional things, we definitely not hit that target. And so we on the advertising side thought about what on earth customers would want. What was the big unmet need in the automotive industry? And I guess if you're looking at that big obvious level, you kind of went, well, the cars are fine, but car dealers, people really don't like them. So we suggested that they built their brand on service. But being an ad agency, we didn't really know how they'd actually create a company that had better service. We just knew how to promise that they'd have better service. Luckily, the management team were looking at a different bit of the problem, which was how would they grow a distribution network to sell that many cars that quickly? And what they knew was that if you went the conventional route, which was to have franchise dealers, then the only franchise dealers that work with a new car company are the worst ones, because the good ones are going to wait and see if you're any good, see if the cars are any good, and so on. So you end up with 150 of the worst dealers in the country to cover the country, and then you gradually make progress from there. So to speed that up, they thought, okay, what if we distributed the cars ourselves? What if we had our own outlets? So the first aha moment was like, well, then you control the service. So you actually have a chance of doing things, employing different people, paying them differently, managing pricing differently. So maybe you can make this promise real. And then the management team did two other things to make the business viable, because you couldn't afford to build 150 shops or 150 showrooms in year one. So they had a different model. They had a couple of showrooms and lots of servicing centres, because servicing customers need convenience. And then they did a deal with Halfords, who just built a load of workshops, 136 workshops to service cars, and they needed more volume. And so that became a way from day one to have national servicing coverage. And it worked brilliantly. We got to 0.92% of the market in the first year. So we missed the target in the eyes of the Koreans, but it was fantastic. I knew it was a sort of once in a career kind of opportunity, or once in a career experience. And from where I was sitting, I thought something had happened that had substance. We'd kind of found something that customers wanted, and we'd built a company to do it. And it seemed to me like simultaneously odd and unusual, but also obvious. And so I wanted to work out how you could do that again, and to do it again without Koreans setting mad targets, which again I knew was unusual. It seemed to me you'd need to bring together two worlds: the world of understanding customers and the world of understanding business. And they didn't tend to mix very well. Most of the people I did my degree with joined management consultants, and were quite different to the people working in advertising. So we thought for a little while with the ad agency about doing a joint venture with a management consultancy. We realized that the cultures were indeed so different it would never work. And so in the end, I set up the foundation with this kind of aim of creating, I suppose, what I would now call customer-led success, and a whole organization succeeding because it's doing a better job for customers, with some sense of needing to cover the territory of customers and business. But frankly, on day one, I didn't really know how. I mean, obviously I had an answer if someone said how, but in retrospect, I didn't know how.
Charlie, that's a fascinating story and great example there. In many ways, I think you were ahead of your time, because there were two things that I picked up on. The first one being the direct distribution model, which clearly in today's context is a D2C sort of e-commerce led approach with most companies, even the traditional FMCGs, are going after. So hey, there we go. 20
Yeah.
years, that's still sort of driving forward. Forgive the pun, of course. And then the second thing, when setting up the foundation, you talked about the convergence of management consultancy and advertising. Well, hey, what's happening in today's context too. So look, in many ways, sort of a real trailblazer and thought leader around it. But really love to hear a little bit about sort of embryonic start, how that took place. How would you actually able to kick it, get it off the ground, and then sort of manage it through the years? Love to get those thoughts.
Yeah. Well, the first year was a bit bizarre because when we started, it was the first internet boom time. So frankly, in the first year, I think we could have been doing anything and we'd have had loads of clients. By the end of the first year, we had 13 people and we worked with 10 clients, and we thought we were doing really well. We nearly got office space for 30 that would fit 35 people. Thank God we didn't, because the next 6 months were bloody awful. And at the end of those 6 months, we had to shrink back down to 5 people. Luckily, we'd got a couple of big projects from Volkswagen to do quite strategic things that were very relevant to this whole customer agenda. And some of the people that had joined in the first year also kind of got what it was we were trying to do, but brought experience from different angles. In fact, one person in particular joined from the civil service of all places, and he was fantastic. He really understood this mixture of business and sort of process and organizational thinking and sort of customer. So it was almost like 18 months in when we really started working out how to do what we do for real. And probably the biggest aha moment was in one of those projects with Volkswagen a year or two on, when we started realizing that the challenge in doing this was less about understanding and analyzing information and more about helping your clients and the people you're working with go on a bit of a journey with you and create the answer with you, because they understood their industry in great depth, but they often saw the world in a way that was a bit narrow and limited, that stopped them escaping from this sort of view that trapped them. So we talked about looking at the world normally from the inside out. That's the natural way. Your colleagues are with you, certainly when it's not lockdown anyway, every day, and customers are distant, and you have lots of assumptions about how things are done. We talk about trying to help people look from the outside in. So look at the world from where customers stand. And when you look from there, you see things very differently. And I guess I should say, sort of being customer-led, so seeing things from this perspective is not about just asking customers what they want and then doing it. And often it sounds like that's what this is about. It's not. It's about two things. It's about really understanding what customers value, really understanding what matters to customers, the problems they're really trying to solve, or the outcomes they really want, which isn't necessarily what they tell you if you ask them directly. So M&S ready meals, for example, are about getting nice food quickly. So there are lots of ways of getting nice food quickly that aren't ready meals. But if you sell ready meals, you think about your market and you think about your competitors and so on in a very particular way. That's half of outside in. The other half of outside in is finding new and better ways to solve those problems or to get to those outcomes. In other words, to innovate. And again, customers won't do that usually. You need to be doing that, and you need to be smart. And what we found was that the challenge wasn't just about helping clients see these things. There was a degree of belief that was needed. So when a market research goes out there and does stuff and comes back and presents with PowerPoint in a meeting room, often if what they say is inconvenient, then people listening will challenge the research, challenge the sample, find some anecdotes that kind of question what they're saying and so on. So we had this sort of instinctive feeling that we needed to do something to have more impact on the people we're working with. So we did some, pretty simple sounding stuff, actually. We sort of started insisting that our clients spoke to some customers themselves. They didn't just rely on, you still need to do market research and things like that because it's broad, but that they also did some stuff themselves and spoke to some customers. And also that we introduced them to parallels. So to help them be innovative, we found organizations that had done things with some similarities to their challenge, but obviously lots of differences because they're in different sectors. And they listen to their stories in person, and they listen to the person that has done them, not to us trying to tell those stories. And what happens when both of these things take place is people believe what they're hearing. So if you speak to a customer directly and they're really frustrated, for example, in Volkswagen's case, they were really frustrated about this, about the cost of servicing. You might be a very gruff Northern Irish MD of Volkswagen who would have told me, if I'd said that was a problem, he would have told me that I didn't really understand how hard it was to solve, and that's not the issue. Why don't we launch a magazine, because magazines are good for loyalty, aren't they? When the customer sort of effectively shouted at him for the cost of servicing, I remember saying to him, did you ask him about the magazine? Of course you didn't. The magazine would make servicing like a bit more expensive, and it's completely missing the point. Why would that person you've spoken to want a magazine about Volkswagens? Only the MD of Volkswagen wants a magazine about Volkswagens. So the penny drops. And in that case, one of the parallels that we introduced them to was Rolls-Royce aero engines, so Rolls-Royce jet engines. And a few years before, they'd introduced a thing called Power by the Hour, where airlines pay for the jet engine time they use rather than buying a jet engine and then paying to get it serviced. And for Volkswagen, after they listened to that story, you could say, okay, if the Rolls-Royce person was here, what would you do? Oh, we do Power by the Hour for cars. And they start describing how they could do it. And again, if I'd suggested that, they'd have said, that's ridiculous, that's impossible, don't be so daft. And actually, they ended up making that idea smaller. And so this was a little while ago, but they invented the sort of service pack, I suppose. When you buy a new car, you can buy 3 years of servicing for a massively discounted price. And then it flips it around, because as a customer, you think you're getting fantastic value. You're delighted to go and get the car serviced, because the more you go, the better value you're getting. But the benefit is in retention. So if customers carry on going to the franchise dealer, they're much more likely to renew with the same car. So it's an outside-in business case where you lose some money on servicing, but you gain it on new car sales. And normally a company would never make, normally those two are silos, almost in competition with each other, because when you're looking inside out, that's how the world looks. So we sort of, with the client team, we help them get to this point where they saw and believed in the world working quite differently. So yeah, that's a sense of how we started learning properly about what mattered.
Belief makes complete sense. My experience is that this is quite fragile in an organization and harder to build, easier to break. So for people watching in who are on that journey of trying to help their organizations to be more customer oriented, how do you make it enduring?
So that's a question in a sense that relates to the book that Ritchie mentioned. So I guess, first of all, there are two sizes of challenge, I guess, in this. So one size of challenge is solving specific problems in a customer-led way. And for that, I guess, it's more like the project team needs to get the belief, and then you need enough shared belief more widely in the organization to act as an umbrella for you to get into action. And then I guess it's the success of what you do that will then sustain belief that you can continue. But there's another version of this that is sort of organization wide, that is about a whole organization being brilliant at making things better for customers. And when whole organizations do this, they tend to be, we talk about customer pioneers, but they tend to be pioneering in their market. They tend to be the first to do things, innovating, and so I guess Tesco at their best were like this, or EasyJet under Carolyn McCall were very good for this. So EasyJet, when EasyJet introduced allocated seating, that was something that apparently in discount airlines you couldn't have, because you couldn't turn the plane. People take longer to sit down when they know where they're sitting, and you need to be able to turn the plane around very quickly for it to go backwards and forwards 8 times in a day, and the prices and the whole business model depends on that. But with EasyJet, it wasn't just a project; it was part of something the whole team were involved in, and that they had what we can talk about it in a bit more depth. But they had what I would call burningness first, which created the conditions for them to be bold. And then they started doing these kind of bold things. And when they did the first bold thing, we call it a moment of belief, that starts changing the beliefs. But then you need a succession of them to maintain things. And actually, over a long time, so going back to your question, Mark, if you've become a genuinely customer-led organization, you need to keep on doing these things. You need to keep on having moments of belief. So my understanding now is that this sort of customer-led state is unfortunately not natural. Even if you're brilliant at it, there's like a force of gravity that pulls you back to being inside out. And you have to sort of determinedly resist it to stay outside in. It's almost like to stay in orbit, to stay aloft. And if you stop pedaling or pushing, you will crash back down.
Charlie, I want to turn a little bit back to the foundation. 21 years in, may I say. How did you sustain it through time? Now, there must have been multiple routes you could have gone down, buyouts, mergers, but you've remained largely independent through this time.
Yeah.
And love to get a little bit of understanding as to why you decided to do that strategic choice around it. And of course, some of the highs and lows that came with being independent for those 21 years.
Good question. So I guess from the beginning, it's felt to me, I guess I've always wanted to be doing work that feels like it's kind of properly useful, that it's doing something with a degree of novelty that to some degree hasn't been done before, and that is valuable, that is valuable to people out there. It makes a difference out there that's worthwhile. And I suppose for I always wondered what that might be, and I felt like I've described the sort of accidental way that this ended up being. Felt like a good example of it. Having found it and having started the journey of learning on it, it felt like one of the things that could most derail us was being part of an organisation ourselves that insisted that we had profits that went up in a neat line every quarter. Because in itself, that's quite an inside-out thing that forces you to do things to create that result that aren't always necessarily the right things for the longer-term goal that you've got, for the clients you're working with, for the learning that you're trying to do. So I suppose it's always felt to me that staying independent is quite important if we're really going to learn and we're really going to be useful and we're really going to solve these sorts of problems. And we need to be owned by the people in the organisation, and we need to be a partnership and an equal partnership. So there are 4 of us as partners now, and we're 4 equal partners, despite the fact I've been doing this for a lot longer. But again, it's sort of looking backwards from the future. That's the only condition that will mean that we're set up in a way that's going to sustain. And I guess given all of that, so there are downsides. The downside of being independent is that we can be sometimes a small boat in choppy seas. When there's a financial crash or a time like the last year, we have to rely on our own resources to get through. And at times that can be a little more nerve-wracking than if you've got a bigger balance sheet to draw on, for example. But I think over 21 years, you start seeing some of these things before. You get better at spotting issues early, and correcting the course and so on. And I think you also learn that if you've got a good team and you're really transparent, if everybody really understands what it is that we're trying to do, then you can be very honest and transparent about the situation that you're in, and people will steer together, and they'll trust that we're trying to look out for everybody and so on. And so, if as lots of organizations had to do in the last year, you have to pay people less for a bit. We even had to reduce, we had 3 people had to leave, but we made sure we looked out for them. We gave them 3 months salary, and we were really concerned. They were the people we most worried about, and they all found other jobs, swiftly. So you still have situations like that. It's not just all easy or all good stuff. But again, if you do those things in the right way, with the right principles, then I think you gradually build up goodwill and trust, and so on, and that helps you along your way.
Yeah, it's been tough times, and it's great to hear how you've looked after your staff through this time. Many people have said that this pandemic has caused a burning platform for their business or their industry. And you said the word burningness, and actually you reminded me, Charlie, of something you shared with me about 4 years ago that I've used. I've always quoted you, but about there's more than one type of burning platform. So what I thought was you could share a little bit of that 3-tier structure. It might be a good gift to everybody watching in terms of how they can articulate burningness quite well to affect change in their organization.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So burningness is this thing that we learned. So writing the book, we learned that organizations don't go. So the thing that really matters in how an organization operates are the shared beliefs that people have in the organization about what success is and how success is achieved. And there are sort of inside out shared beliefs or shared belief systems and outside in shared belief systems. And as I sort of hinted at, inside out shared belief systems are more natural, unfortunately, than outside in the customer led ones. So an inside out, example might be success is selling more, or something like that, hitting the numbers. And a good way of achieving it is to set higher sales targets and promise people lots of money if they hit them, and get annoyed with them if they don't. And that's very powerful for two reasons. One is that everyone, like everyone does that. So what's wrong with that? I'm just joining in with what the majority do. And the second thing is that if you start in a degree of chaos and then you do what I just described, for a while you'll do better because you'll be really organized and people know what they're doing and so on. But eventually the number you're trying to hit becomes so big that you can only hit it by pushing like hell. And that means at best you become very promotional, and at worst you start making the numbers up or worse. Outside in things, customer-led things are very difficult to make the case for. Often a customer-led initiative is, so it's like Tesco's one in front queuing thing back from 1994. It's obviously good for customers. Obviously customers don't like queuing, so make the queue short, that's going to be good. The costs are clear to Tesco. There was 60 million quid a year in 1994. What are the benefits going to be? What are customers going to do when you do this? Are they going to come more often? Are they going to spend more per visit? Or are they just going to smile and spend the same, in which case you've just added 60 million quid a year to your costs? And a further problem is you often don't know in advance. You can't predict in advance exactly what they're going to do. So you can't research it because customers don't know what they're going to do. If you pilot it, you show Sainsbury's what you're about to do. So it requires kind of conviction or belief to take the step and trust that you're going to be okay. So getting into action with those sorts of things took this precondition. When we looked at all these stories of organizations that had gone from inside out to outside in, we saw that they all had burningness as a precondition before they took the first steps. And burningness, as Mark is saying, is one of three things. It's pain or fear or ambition. And that's in descending order of effectiveness. So pain is the most effective because it's going wrong now. So nobody can argue with the fact you need to do something differently. Fear is a bit less effective. So fear is a bit like you're Kodak and you've been very successful. You've invented digital photography, but why would you introduce digital photography when you're doing really well and sort of undermine your own business model? So you wait. That's the problem with fear. You wait. Ambition is the least effective because everything's fine now and in the future. Ambition is entirely self-generated. And the point about calling them burningness is that you have to hold whatever one or combination of those things are relevant to a degree that feels like you're on fire. You've got to feel whatever it is that you're seeing, like you care about it to the degree that you not putting the fire out is simply not an option. And what that does is it flips the risk. So normally, keeping on doing what you're doing now is less risky than trying something bold, like the one in front queuing idea. If you're on fire, then keeping doing what you're doing is madness. And doing something else is you're now probably looking at a set of like not ideal options, and you'll take the best one and you'll execute that. And when you do that and it works, you get confidence. So going back to my Daewoo story, what the Koreans did with those targets is they set a burning ambition. And in setting those targets, and I sort of described it in that way, in setting those targets in that way, they created the situation where the only thing we could do was bold, and we responded to it because we were outward looking in a way that was customer led. And we got the bravery to do the thing that we were describing that was very innovative. Whereas if they'd set a sales target of 0.1% in a year, we wouldn't have done any of that because we wouldn't have had burningness. We'd have had conventionalness. And we'd have set the whole thing up in a perfectly normal way. So burningness is, and I now sincerely believe that you can't become a true customer pioneer, a real leader in your market, unless you have burningness first. And if you don't have that from somewhere, you won't do it. because it's just going to be too hard to get people to do those customer-led things like allocated seating, like one in front queuing, like O2's, promising to charge existing customers exactly the same as new customers. That those sort of initiatives are pretty hard to make in a very rational, inside-out organization.
Amazing. Charlie, I love the concept of burningness, pain, fear, and ambition, in any combination of one or the other to really create true customer success. But you know what? I'm going to turn this right back at you and talk about your burningness, right? Because you've clearly just about to have co-authored a book coming out next month. And I would tell you that actually to write a book, it does take either pain, fear, or ambition. I've literally just finished my book myself, coming up next month too, so we might be a little bit of competition there. But clearly a lot of pain along the way. Fear, well, you talked about holding it off. It took you 7 years, mate. Didn't take me that long. And some amazing burning ambition in you to actually release that. So tell us a little bit about that. Tell us what the book's about, and actually more importantly, the journey around getting to the end and final result.
So 7.5 years ago, I suppose I had a sort of fairly vague idea that writing a book at some point would be the sort of thing that you do when you're doing the sort of things that we're doing at the foundation. We've learned a lot of stuff. We should write a book. So I rapidly thought writing a book on my own would be harder than writing a book with someone else. And there was someone I knew, a chap called Sean Meehan. I'd met him at London Business School in the late 90s when he was doing his PhD, and I was talking about DAU as a case study. And he went on to become a professor at IMD, the business school. And I discovered his PhD was almost like about the theoretical version of what the foundation is about. It was all about being customer-led or being customer responsive. He'd co-written a couple of books with Paddy Barwise, who I also know very well. And so I thought he might be quite a good person to ask if he wanted to do this. So I said, we had dinner, and I said to him over dinner, let's write a book. Let's write a book about being customer-led. He said, that would be really boring. I was like, oh, okay. We said, there's loads of books about that. What's a more interesting angle? So we had a chat about it for a bit, and what we got to was two questions in the end that we wanted to answer. So the first was the more obvious one. So we looked at customer-led successes. So Tesco at their best, or EasyJet at their best, or O2 at their best, or Handelsbanken for the last 50 years, or Direct Line, I'd say, actually, Mark. Lots and lots of examples of Lego at various times in the history, brilliant customer-led successes. So when you look at them, you see two things. Firstly, the insight they've often had about customers sort of seems obvious afterwards. Tesco was sort of, customers want a better experience when they're shopping. O2 is like customers, existing customers don't like getting ripped off by, giving better deals to new customers. It's also commercially very attractive. So those organizations all did amazingly well commercially. So the first question was, if it's so obvious and it's so attractive, why the hell is it so rare? You'd think everyone would be doing it. And then we also had to answer a second question, which you probably would have spotted, which is why, once you got the hang of it, would you ever stop? Because Tesco clearly stopped. O2, I think, stopped. I think EasyJet are on their way to stopping. Handelsbanken have been going very well for 50 years, and they are not showing no signs of stopping. But we had to answer that question as well. And so we sat down and we decided that those were the questions we were trying to answer. And I guess a good way of answering would be to talk to lots of these organizations about their stories and learn. And I guess one of the things that's taken time, because we couldn't just stop doing everything else and only do this, is to have all these conversations and to do all this learning. And I guess probably a bit like the foundation, actually. Thank God I didn't know it at the time, but I think when we started writing the book, I think we probably thought we knew lots of the answer, and it turned out we didn't. I mean, I didn't know about burningness, for example, when we started writing the book. It was something we genuinely learned, as we went, listening to people's stories, and starting to see the patterns emerging of what was happening, and what made things go right and what made things go wrong, and so on. So yeah, and I guess I can't quite believe it has taken 7 years, but it just feels like if you just string together all of the things we did one after the other, it's added up to that. It's slightly ridiculous.
Yeah, persistence and resilience, and we'll come back to that shortly. Just a couple of things. Raju says the British retail industry is a burning deck. do well to adapt the burning deck approach for that. Please bring your questions in. Richard, interesting question here I'm going to ask, which links to the point about belief. But anyway, why do you think some people are naturally drawn to customer orientation and some, frankly, aren't?
One way of talking about inside out and outside in is being inside out is a bit like being self-interested, and being outside in is a bit like being selfless. It's quite hard. It's very natural. I mean, it is perfectly natural, pretty much for all of us to, if you're in a situation to start with, like your own view of it, and if you're an organisation to start with you and what you do and what matters to you and trying to do more of it. It is mentally harder to imagine how things look from where someone else is standing, and I'm describing that in a slightly rational way, but actually you also need to empathise with how they feel and how it might feel to be standing to be in their position and not in your position, and I think that's what this is what customer orientation is about. It is about starting with someone else and understanding their world and what matters to them, and trying to make their world better, and trying to then do it in a way that makes that it's sustainable, that you can make work for your organization as well, but it's in that order. And I just think that's you can sort of see why it's a less natural thing. And some people are just more, they just start with themselves. They're not great with self-awareness and etc. And I think you're just less wired to what you need to be customer orientated.
Super answer there, Charlie. I'm going to ask another question coming in from the floor from Phil. He asks, being purpose-led is the latest mantra. Do you see a strong connection between purpose-led and customer-led?
Brilliant question. Thank you for asking. Yes, absolutely, I do. And there's so many overlaps with all of what we learnt in doing the book and so on, because I think the scarcity. So first of all, I think a good purpose tends to be about serving others, and I personally believe the purpose of all organisations is to serve their customers, or to serve other people who you hope might become your customers. And in this field of purpose, when people get involved in trying to answer questions about purpose, I guess there's a version of it that ends up being all about a sentence. And people write something on a wall and nobody really believes it. I mean, that's supposed to be why the organization exists, really. And often people assume that sort of in brackets, that sort of, if we do that, we'll make more money, and making money, that's really the reason why the organization exists. But we don't need to say that. We just assume, that's obvious. And then this purpose thing is a sort of, is a almost like a proposition or something. I don't know. It's just something that we will talk about, but we don't really believe that's why we're here. Because if you really believe it's why you're here, you make choices that are inconvenient commercially to do more of that, and rather than shorter term and more financially orientated. So I completely agree. I think, and a lot of the work that we're doing now is about helping organisations connect with us with a sort of sense of why they're here, and again believe in it, and then start to act on it, and then acting on it is what takes you out into being customer orientated and learning how to do a better job for the people out there that you're serving.
What you say, Charlie, is obvious but rare. But we're coming towards the end. So the question I've been wanting to ask is, if you stick at something for 21 years, you're going to screw some things up along the way. So, tell us about some of the undulations, what you learned about recovery, resilience, learning from mistakes.
Yeah, there's plenty of mistakes in 21 years. Oh God, so many things. I mean, that year one thing was tough because we could have failed right at the beginning, or right near the beginning. There've been funny little things that you learn as you get coached. So I remember I used to have this rather naive view of a successful meeting. I know somehow from advertising, it's probably not fair of advertising, but somehow from advertising, a successful meeting was one that I would have talked a lot at. And one of the things I've enjoyed about the foundation is we had an advisory board for a lot of the time, and we had some quite old, some quite senior people with experience of very different things to what we'd done, and they coached us. And sometimes it was a bit painful. I remember going to a meeting with a guy called Peter Lawson, who used to be at LEK Consulting, and he introduced me to the MD of the post office or something. And I talked away. I thought it was a brilliant meeting. And we came out, and he just said, "For goodness sake, shut up." So there was a point where you'd said stuff, and he clearly understood it, and he wanted to tell you. He basically wanted to tell you the answer. He wanted to tell you what he wanted, which is why we'd had the meeting. But he couldn't get a word in edgeways because you wouldn't shut up. It's like, oh, okay, I see now. So this is about listening. So listening is the thing we're trying to do. You know, that we need to speak just enough to get the point across, and then we need to listen really carefully and ask questions that are really thoughtful, and really try and get to where we're trying to get to. So that's a sort of little example. I guess another thing that's been a challenge has been building a team. This is a collective activity that we're engaged at the foundation, and it's quite a challenge to find people that are sort of wired, I suppose, in the way where we need to cover quite a breadth of interest. You need to be quite articulate about business, but also very empathetic about customers and humans and human beings. And so I guess I've, over time, we've done sometimes more well and sometimes less well at that. And those challenges, when you do less well, it takes quite a long time to fix. So I don't know. I mean, there's some of the examples, but I mean, we make mistakes every day and every week. It's acting. There's a very good, actually, I've learned from someone else, acting and learning. So trying things and genuinely learning both what's proved useful and what next time would be more useful. That's the way to make the fastest progress if you're trying to do something innovative. So it's best not to be afraid of trying things and dive in and have a go, but then be very mindful of, a bit like my advice about don't talk so much in a meeting. Well, thankfully, I think I only need to get told that once.
Thank you for that, Charlie, and some great small anecdotes there. But I totally relate to your point around probably me talking too much, but also around your team challenges. It's so critical, right? I mean, especially when operating in relatively small teams, that each person really is able to kind of grab their roles with both hands. Charlie, look, we're totally out of time, and it's absolutely just whizzled by. It's been fantastic having you on this morning. I'm just going to talk a little bit of some of my key takeaways. And first of all, apologies to the audience for any questions that we've missed out on. Really do sorry about that. Sorry for that. But let me just tell you a few key takeaways that I kind of took from this conversation. I mean, clearly the first thing that you left an impression on me is this sort of trailblazing sort of idea, that notion that sort of being ahead of the game in many respects, whether you talk about the direct distribution models of yesterday and what it looks like now today, management consulting and creativity coming together, perhaps encapsulating what the foundation is all about in relation to that customer success that you talk about. One of the mantras, I think, what I often hear from John, one of your partners, is aha moments. And I love that thought, and it feels very, very foundation-esque around the aha moments. Clearly, a big theme that you really strive for is the outside-in approach to solving problems, and you came up with so many great examples. The one thing that really struck with me about how to get your customers to believe in you is through that parallel industry sort of anecdote that you mentioned. I thought that was super powerful, and I think all of us should be doing that slightly more and better. Burningness, clearly encapsulated pain, fear, and ambition. And finally, listening and questioning, and don't be afraid to try. So many great things that have come out of this conversation for me. I'm going to pass over to Mark for some of his key takeaways and to close.
Thanks, Ritchie. Yes, I mean, Ritchie said a lot of it already, but a few things for me. Yeah, a lot of what you talk about, Charlie, is obvious but rare. But I like the way you talked about the way you create belief is through those two levers of getting people close to customers and referencing parallels. But in the end, this is hard. There's a gravity you're constantly fighting. Burningness is one of the weapons in your armory, and pain is the best one. That makes sense. But very interested about your point about selflessness versus selfishness. Probably that's the key thing, is that you have to get to a position where you care and you care about customers' outcomes, which is sort of more as much emotional as rational. But But also, I love the Daewoo leadership team saying, "Don't tell me why we can't, tell me how we can." And I think that is a really, really straightforward way to get people to have ambition and put themselves behind that ambition. So, Charlie, it's been fantastic having you on the show. And on behalf of us and the guests, thank you for giving us your time this morning.
Brilliant. Thank you for asking me. It's been really enjoyable.
Thank you, Charlie. And just so you know, we'll be back next week. We've got a great guest next week. We've got Sir Clive Woodward, OBE, coach of the 2003 Rugby World Cup winning team, England team. Went on to be the performance coach for 2012 Olympics, where we obviously had our record gold haul. And he's had some fun adventures along the way. So tune in next week to hear from Sir Clive Woodward. And before that, have a great weekend, everybody. And thanks for tuning in.